Hello and good morning, or at least we used to say good morning for the last decade and a half, but now that we're on Zoom, it's good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. But welcome to the Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. We have been meeting every Sunday morning for over a decade and a half, and now we're on Zoom, so we have a much more diverse audience. These weekly programs are organized by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, the ICSS, and this session is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. And a web link will be available in the next few days at our website, and our website is ICSSmarks.org. My name is Roger Harris, and I'm on the program committee for these programs. And the Sunday morning Marxist Forum programs are a platform for diverse presentations on the left. You can sign up for email notifications for future programs. Past programs can be viewed on the web where the YouTubes are posted. And you could contact us at the website ICSSmarks.org. And we always welcome your input, feedback, suggestion for topics and speakers. Our speaker today is a really esteemed friend and colleague, comrade. The person is Bahman Azad. He'll be speaking on a very critical issue of what's happening right now in West Asia. And we'll have a presentation, probably around 45 minutes, followed by some short announcements, and then we'll have a robust Q&A afterward. Our speaker, Bahman Azad, is a retired professor of economics and sociology. His area of research includes the political economy of capitalism and socialism. He is the author of the book, Heroic Struggle, Bitter Defeat, Factors Contributing to the Dismantling of the Socialist State in the USSR. He is currently president of the U.S. Peace Council, and he's a member of the Secretariat of the World Peace Council. He is a representative of the World Peace Council at the United Nations, and he's also a member of the Administrative Committee of UNAC, the United National Anti-War Coalition. He is affiliated with the anti-imperialist site, Iranian site 10 Mayor group, and I highly recommend going there. The numeral 10 and the word mayor, M-E-H-R. He was co-chair of the Venezuelan Embassy Protectors Defense Committee, and he's currently serving as the coordinator of the Coalition Against U.S. Military Foreign Bases and co-coordinator of the Hands Off Syria Coalition. With that said, Bahman will be very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say about what's currently happening in West Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, and all the comrades for inviting me. Thank you, Roger, for the lengthy introduction, which I didn't deserve. Today, we are talking about an issue that I'm sure almost all of you, everybody knows what is going on more or less, and there's no need for me to explain. But I thought maybe I should just deal with some of the challenging issues, especially particular interpretations of what is happening, and leave that for discussion. So I try to be short in terms of my presentation by just raising the questions I have and the challenges I want to bring into the picture, and then leave it to the discussion, because it's more important that we resolve some of these issues in a collective discussion than just one-way presentation. All of us know how quickly the whole Syrian government collapsed. There's a lot of arguments about why it did happen and all that. But I would like to challenge one first before anything else. Because of this quickness of the fall, quite a number of people have started, including in the left, have started some kind of Assad bashing in the process of, explaining what is going on, trying to blame Assad for everything that went wrong in Syria. Few things they say, for example, one is incompetence of the government, dictatorship. It's dealing with Qatar and a few other countries in the region, and also the question of neoliberalism that everybody raises. I would like to challenge that personally. I'm sure a lot of people may disagree, but blaming Assad for the disaster that is before us, to me, I would go as far as calling it a kind of a left opportunism in this process, because we are just becoming suddenly the conscience of history and trying to judge others while they are in action and in struggle. Secondly, this move kind of distracts the attention of the movement, the whole movement, resistance movement, from the main causes of this event, and kind of redirects the blame instead of pointing to imperialism, U.S. imperialism, and Zionism, and the project for the new Middle East, to the victims of imperialism and Zionism, including Assad himself. In addition, it does not see the complexity of the whole social structure, social system in Syria, and blames it personally on him. So, first of all, many even go as far as calling it revolutions. I mean, that was the first thing CNN did. It's a popular revolution for democracy. These are all falsehoods, in my view, and should be challenged at every step, and keep the focus on the real enemies of the people in the region, and on the big culprits of this whole disaster for the resistance movement in the Middle East. Assad was not a dictator. I mean, some of the comrades who have been to Syria know. I know Jerry, on a delegation of the U.S. Peace Council, was in Syria, and they met various groupings, including members of parliament and other forces, including Assad. And I'm sure those who have seen the situation in Syria firsthand know that the whole thing started in 2011 with the peaceful demonstrations for changes in the political structure, and some modifications in the constitution of Syria. And Assad's government responded quickly, and they made the differences, the changes. As far as I know, reporting from comrades who came back from Syria, we're talking about there were 30 parties in the parliament, represented in the parliament during Assad time. Those changes were made, but the enemy of the people, they took advantage and took a ride on top of this peaceful demonstration and turned it into a military or a kind of violent war against the government, mostly initiated from across the borders of the country, from Turkey and other places, and turned it into a 14-year war of internal war that caused tremendous damages to the Syrian economy, society, and everything else. And those who say that this was a people's revolution forget that for 14 years, people of Syria resisted this foreign intervention and took side with their own government. And the same Syrian military did that. So it was not a revolution by the Syrian people, because no revolution starts from outside the borders in an armed format. We have seen revolutions and we know where they start. And this is not one of them. The whole question of incompetence of Assad regime, Assad government. Well, again, talking about economic collapse, talking about inflation, talking about high rate of poverty, without talking about the sanctions For decades, Assad government, Syrian government, from the first moment that after Iranian revolution stood, was what the only Arab country that stood on the side of Iran with the revolution and with the Hezbollah, and paid the price for it for all these times. And they were ready to pay for it, for the cause of the resistance in the region. And that's the price they paid for it. It was imperialism, it was sanctions, it was internal war, and more than even economically, from economic point of view, it was U.S. military sitting on the oil fields of Syria and stealing every drop of oil from that country. So it was, and on top of that, if you remember the Caesar Act or law or whatever they passed in 2019, that really intensified the whole process and led directly to the collapse, economic collapse of Syria. So the question is, who is the main cause of this collapse? And I strongly believe that it is imperialism and Zionism and the plan of the project for crushing all the resistance in the region, and not Assad government. And I think, I would like to add this also, that this, some people call it a strategic defeat of the axis of resistance in the region, and a strategic defeat for the Islamic Republic of Iran. I challenge that point too, and I would like to hear your responses. I consider this as a very important, devastating military defeat. No question about that. But to call it a strategic is a mistake. Because if you want to look at it as a strategy, as a Marxist at least, a strategy applies to a certain historical period of time with a given objective. What was the objective of the resistance? The objective was to rid the region of the hegemony of imperialism and Israel. That was to get rid of domination of these forces. That was the objective. What was the strategy? This was announced several times. And this strategy was based on the global strategy of the whole movement toward a multipolar world, which was a long-term war of attrition, not a military confrontation. You have seen it in the policies of China, Russia, Iran. Even during confrontation with Israel, you have seen how many times and how long Iran hesitated in terms of getting engaged directly with Israel. This was based on this understanding that the war that is going on in the Middle East, the struggle that is going on in the Middle East, is just one front in the global movement. We're moving in that direction. And it was not a fight in isolation for itself. So it had to go according to this general strategy of the whole movement toward the multipolar world. Ayatollah Khamenei several times, multiple times, emphasized this idea of long-term war of attrition with Israel and the United States, and not a military confrontation directly. That was the policy. And that was the strategy. But that strategy was disrupted, justifiably, I would say, by the October 7 uprising of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people had every right to decide when and how to rise up against Israel. 75 years of oppression and genocide and everything. That was the Palestinian people's rights. It's like when you want to go from one city to another and suddenly a truck turns around in front of you or a person jumps into the street. You have to steer away from that and may end up in a ditch and end up pulling it out after a while. But the fact is that you still want to go to the destination. this military confrontation that was a result of 7th October, and I will say justifiably, I'm not saying it shouldn't have happened. This is not the idea. Historical events cannot be controlled like that. It happens. That had the impact of moving the axis of resistance away from its general strategy of long-term war of attrition to a new phase of having to confront Israel and defend Palestine in that process. So a long-term war of attrition, which was the strategy, was now, because of the historical necessity, transformed into a direct military confrontation. Now, we have to consider the situation that the whole global movement was trying to avoid it, because that was the only arena, military confrontation, where the U.S. and imperialism and NATO still have the upper hand. It was, in a sense, that the global movement was not ready yet. The pieces of the elements of the puzzle for transformation of the whole global movement into a victorious stage was not in place when this happened. So it was forced to shift gears and move to a kind of a military battle with Israel and United States out of necessity. Well, it was clear that at such a level, military victory was not an easy one. So in that sense, and you saw what happened. The genocide, the attack on Lebanon, the assassinations Israel carried out, everything else. It made it clear that this is not militarily vulnerable, especially given the condition in Syria and the crisis, economic, political, military. So in my view, you can challenge that. A lot of people say Russia betrayed Syria, Iran betrayed Syria. No, I think it was a very conscious, calculated decision for a calculated retreat to minimize the damage at this stage, so that the struggle can be shifted back to a long-term war of attrition, to a political level, to a social level, and to a diplomatic level. People say, why didn't Iran bomb Israel when it went into Gaza? Well, I asked them, what do you think would happen if Iran bombed Israel during that period? That would stop Israelis, a few missiles into Israel. Wouldn't that add 75,000 people killed in Gaza, turn it into 250,000? Do we have any guarantees? These are issues that we have to figure out. We cannot just, off the top of our head, make these kind of claims or accusations. I think the retreat was a conscious, I think, collective decision of Iran and Russia, because that would involve sending ground troops into Syria, which had huge logistical difficulties in the short term, and at the same time could drag in other forces in the region into this military confrontation that would result in that all-out war in the Middle East that the whole movement was trying to avoid. And Israel and U.S. were trying to push forward. Israel more so, U.S. less so, because of other considerations. So it wasn't a military defeat. I mean, it was a military defeat, but not a strategic defeat. We are going back to the strategy of the resistance after this, and I don't think it's a total defeat. We lost the battle over a kind of one single front of the whole movement. In every war, militaries retreat in one front and go forward in another, and this is the case. So it's could not be a source of disappointment or disillusionment either. The struggle continues and resistance continues, and that cannot be doubted for a minute. Objective is still the same there. The strategy has worked out, still the same. So in a sense, the struggle continues. And I don't think that any power or any force betrayed the situation. And I think the timing for this attack on Syria was well calculated by the enemy. They knew that Russia was engaged in Ukraine. They knew that Iran, after the last election, presidential election, was grappling with many serious political and economic problems inside the country. And Syria was really, I would say, they had turned into the ripe fruit to be picked for themselves. And given all the circumstances coming together in this situation, they found the opportunity to do it. But I don't think, Israel is marching into Syria, but I don't think, given the size of Israel, the the population size, and the nature of the state, they are not able to control a large swath of territory in the long term. There's no way. The victorious forces, U.S., Turkey, Israel, do not see eye to eye with regard to a lot of issues. Just take the example of Kurdish issue. That could be a cause of problem for them. Each is going to pull the whole issue in a different direction. The same with the terrorist forces that took over. 10, 15 different organizations of different sects with different affiliations, with different attachments to different reactionary forces in the governments in the region. There's going to be a battle over this all over the place. The people who won this fight will not remain united or unified or going in the same direction. We're going to see the same problem that we saw in Afghanistan, the same problem that we saw in Iraq, in Syria. It's not going to be this different. After 15 years of occupation of Iraq, after 18, 20 years of occupation of Afghanistan, neither of the two states or countries are under the thumb of the United States. Syria will not be like that either, I don't think. So that is my challenging argument. And I would like to get you involved because these are just my ideas. It's not based on so many facts as it is based on logical conjectures. And it requires additional discovery of facts and uncovering of facts and bring it to the picture. So I would love to hear what others think about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahman. That was a terrific introduction, and I'll be very much looking forward to the Q&A so that we can get into some of the questions that you raised and add some of our own as well. But before we do that, just a quick announcement. This is the Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. We do have expenses. So those of you who would like to donate to that expenses for our website and stuff like that, please go to our website, ICSS, the initials ICSS ICSmarks.org. And we have a very exciting program coming up. Over the holidays, we won't be meeting, but come the new year, we will be meeting on January 5. And Harpal Brar will be returning. He is with the Communist Party Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, and he will be speaking on more or less a continuation of this topic. He'll be talking about what's happening with Ukraine, with West Asia, and the world situation. That should be a very interesting program as well. He's a major Marxist thinker. Then the following weekend, January 12th, that Sunday morning, our own Mehmet Bayram will be coming back. He will be speaking on Turkey, the internal dynamics in Turkey, how that relates to Syria, the Kurds, the Russians, and so forth. And Bahman has just recently returned from an extended stay in Turkey, so he'll have a lot to say about that. That following weekend is January 19. Stan Smith will be speaking, and he'll be speaking on something that Bahman sort of inferred. He'll be talking about what the CIA calls the compatible left. These are the people who I sort of call the anti-imperialist. These are the people that claim to be leftist, but end up making a narrative that supports the imperialist. And he'll be talking about their role in the international struggle. And then finally, not finally, but looking forward to January 26th, when I believe Laura Wells, who's on this call right now, will be organizing a presentation about third parties in the United States, particularly the Green Party. Laura is, I believe, I don't have the exact title, but in effect, she's the co-chair of the California Green Party. And we should have Laura on and perhaps one of the Green Party national candidates, possibly Butch Ware, who ran for vice president under the Green Party ticket. So that's still in the works. We'll be having announcements on that as that develops. But now let's go back to the Q&A. And as those of you who are familiar with the Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum, we ask you to raise your hand, and you could do that by going to the reaction button on the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. And we ask that you limit your comments or questions to about 2 minutes. In fact, two minutes. And if you don't, we'll cut you off, but politely we'll do it. And so I see that we have Norma Harrison has the first question.
Good. I thank you very much. I'm very pleased to listen to this presentation, but that's the usual thing with these presentations. I'm very pleased. I have a question I posted in the chat, but I thought I'd ask it now. Can we hear response to the charges, these terrifying charges of the abuse of the populace by Bashar, by the government?
Excuse me, Roger, you want to?
Yes, we'll do. Our customary way of doing this, Bahman, is to do one question at a time. It's sort of more interactive. So if you could respond to that, then we'll go on to the next one.
Okay. Well, to me, there may have been some repressive measures in Syria for the control of the situation in the country. That is, that cannot be denied. But the question for me, the way I look at it, is that if the U.S. puts your country, your government, on the list of 7 countries that need to be overthrown, and uses foreign mercenaries to invade your country, committing terroristic acts all over, what would you do as the leader of the... I'm not trying to justify that. What I'm trying to say is that even that situation is a response to something, and not a direct act on the part of the state. Most of the states that are threatened like that will do that. Don't forget, during World War I, World War II, during the war with Germany and Japan, U.S. was fighting on foreign lands. Its soil was never threatened, right? We put 30,000 Japanese in the camps, right? So if we could do it this way, without any reason, a country that is being attacked directly on the list of U.S. overthrown or candidates for overthrow, and action has started for doing that. A kind of reaction to that situation kind of inevitably leads to some kind of let me give you one example. The question is also, we should ask ourselves, who were those people who were in prison during Assad time? Who were they? Were they regular citizens or somebody else? That is another question that we have. To just say, okay, we released 300 people. Who were those 300 people? I look at it that way. I give you one example. I worked very closely with Dr. Bashar Jafari, the ambassador of Syria at the United Nations before he became vice foreign minister, deputy foreign minister, and now ambassador to Russia. I was working closely with him on many issues, including the situation in Syria, because I had asked him to keep me informed about what is going on inside Syria regularly so we can act upon it from here, from the viewpoint of the U.S. Peace Council. Dr. Jafari several times gave me a list of people, terrorists, who have been either captured or killed, with the names, which city, at what time, engaged in what kind of activity. I still have some of them somewhere around here. It included hundreds of people, those lists. I'm assuming that those who are still alive were in prison. Okay. So when we talk about, oh, there was 300 people in this prison, 200 in that prison, probably we have to first examine who are these people. Why are they in prison? Is it because of their political views, or is it because of terroristic acts, which has been common in Syria? So those things we have to consider.
Right.
I would just go by numbers.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Bahman. Next is Bill Mayer, followed by Mehmet Bayram. So Bill, take it away. Unmute yourself.
Actually, I thought I saw Mehmet was next, but I'll go.
We don't have an order.
Oh, you don't have an order. Okay, fine.
It's at the discretion.
All right. Well, I'm
of
glad to
moderator.
have a chance to talk to Bahman. That was great, the presentation. Thank you, Bahman. So here we are finding Bahman dealing with another fall of a country, and he wrote a great book about the fall of the Soviet Union. And now, what is about 30 years later, we're talking about the fall of Syria. So my questions are two, and they're sort of related to each other. They seem to both come as a surprise in a way. We were all shocked when the Soviet Union actually totally fell and it was gone. And now it seems like we were surprised that all of a sudden there's this invasion from the north and took over the government very quickly in a few days without any much military action. So my question is, you wrote a book back then about the fall, and we debated after it fell, the Soviet Union, that it, how much was related to external conditions or internal. A lot of us thought it was like 50-50. So I'm curious how you felt about Syria right now. How much is it internal problems? How much external? And the second question that sort of ties into this is, how come the left is not aware of this stuff happening? Like for a year, they've been arming these people and getting them ready to attack the government up in Idlib. And the countries knew about it. Russia knew about it. Iran knew about it. And they just forgot about it for a year. I mean, how could you prevent this kind of stuff? Well, what's wrong with the left not knowing what's going to happen? Why is it always a surprise when the government falls? Thank you.
Good to see you, Bill. Good speaking with you. Bill, I didn't remember that I ever said that it was a surprise with the Soviet Union. One thing I mentioned, I think, in that book as a conclusion, that the process of generational crisis was different from the process of the bringing down the government. The crisis in the Soviet Union was a result of deviating from the principles of socialist planning after the during and after the 50s in many ways. And I think I mentioned that two mistakes were made by the party when they opened their door to turn themselves from a party of working class into the party of the whole Soviet people. And secondly, did the same thing with regard to the state, calling the Soviet government, Soviet state as the state of all people, which triggered a lot of processes inside the country that caused a lot of problems, including emergence of that's what I'm saying, what I've said in the book, emergence of a layer, bureaucratic layer in the state that has its own interest as opposed or different from the interests of the state, socialist state. And Gorbachev was the carrier of that banner. So the crisis that was created was a result of internal mistakes that the system made, the state made, the party made. But the collapse was a part of a collusion with the West, which was a totally different process. So there was a path that started even under Andropov that they could have reversed the process. Unfortunately, it didn't last long, and with the help of the West, they brought Gorbachev to power. And this is how it happened. So, and even the victory was, if you remember, when Yeltsin bombed the parliament and banned the Communist Party and everything else, with the help of the West. So the two processes were not the same. I would say the same thing with Syria. The crisis was a result of sanctions, sealing of the resources, pushing a 10-year war, internal war on the country. That was one process. The second is arming of all of those groups and everything else and sending them inside the country. That's a different process. The fact that there was a surprise, probably surprise was the rapid collapse. Surprise was not the attack, because they were building it, and I'm sure that the Iranian government, Syrian government, and the Russian government were well aware of the building up of all those forces there. The question was coming together of various elements, factors that would make it a very opportune time for the Western powers, Israel and the United States, to trigger that attack. One thing that some of the Iranians are saying, Iranian officials are saying internally, I don't know if you have heard it, but they say Turkey had given us assurances that these forces will not be moving south in this situation. Some say they lied to us, they deceived us, but that's another aspect, that what dirty role did Turkey play in this business, giving the appearance of cooperating with Russia and Iran, and at the same time conspiring with the West for this moment. These things have to be really factually established. I don't know. But it wasn't the left that was surprised.
Okay. So next up is Mamet, followed by Felipe.
Thank you very much, Bahram, for a great presentation. Thank you. I was going to say something else, but I'd like to answer together with you on the questions of the so-called crimes that Assad has been committing in Syria. I was in Syria about 10, 12 years ago, and it was one of the best countries that I had ever seen. There was no shanty towns. Just believe it. I mean, from Turkey, I'm going where everywhere was shanty towns and poverty. You go to Syria, you did not see this. It was a place where men and women could drink and dance together in public spaces. Now I believe there are like about 11 communist members were in the parliament. This is what Syria was about. But while my travels, while I was traveling there, I saw the plaza, I believe it was in Homs, where hundreds of Muslim Brotherhood and the Sharia jihadist terrorists were hanged. But they were hanged not because of their belief, because they had organized and attacked the Syrian government and the Syrian people. So yes, Syria had the reason to defend itself from these terrorists that were already attacking their system, their country from right and left. Turkey is very much involved in this. Coming back to today, just a couple of days, no, even yesterday, Turkish foreign minister openly said, we had been collaborating with the HTS for many years now, he said, admitting the leader of Syria is still a wanted man, a terrorist in Turkish justice system. And the foreign minister of Turkey hugged him yesterday. They went on a mountain to observe Damascus together. They ride in the same car and so on and so forth. So now let me ask something to Bahram, is that there may not be a strategic position on, most probably there is, to getting the oil and everything. But what we are seeing in attacks to Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth is a complete destruction of a country. That could be very well one of the reasons at top to attack these countries, turn them back to the Stone Age, where they can never recover again, and let them deal with that rubble and everything while the world moves on, as we've seen in Afghanistan. What do you think about that? Thank you.
You're absolutely right. They do that, and there's a purpose for it, because they are well aware that they are not going to be, they may attack and destroy and kill, but they cannot stop the desire, the essential yearning of people to be free, to be independent, and to have a good life. That you cannot stop. So with every attack always comes a building of a resistance. And the objective is to make it impossible for people to come back and resist. This is exactly why they are destroying everything in Syria right now. Right? They want to make it impossible for the Syrian people, even when they rise up, to have any means of recapturing the situation. Destroying the infrastructure, destroying the military bases, destroying hospitals, destroying, this is what Israelis are doing in Gaza. But one thing I think is clear that they are worried about. This has been my general belief, that the West, since the turn of the 21st century, with the rise of China, with the qualitative shift in the forces, global forces, the forces of resistance going from a defensive position to an active position after Ukraine, and then Palestine, it is clear that if the Middle East fell out of the control of the U.S. and Israel, the whole process toward a multipolar world will be made irreversible. They knew that. So they are going all the way to destroy any possibility of a return of the situation. They don't want to lose this, and they're doing it everywhere. But I think, like I've said this example, this is a situation like the climate crisis, that the scientists is warning that beyond a certain point, it becomes point of no return, and we cannot go back anymore. I think imperialism has realized that this movement to a multipolar world is getting to a point of no return, and they have to do everything at their disposal, do anything they can to not let them reach that point. And now, Middle East and West Asia is one target of this process and this policy, because that is a critical issue. And fall of Middle East would be the end of the U.S. hegemony. That would be the end globally. And they're going to tooth and nail defend their position here. We have a hard struggle ahead of us, but they cannot stop the whole process. They may delay it, but the process, in my view, will continue within a more strong way after this.
Thank you. So, Philippa, you're up next, followed by Raj Sahai.
Yeah, hi. Just to continue what you're saying, thank you so much for bringing up the global struggle. We tend to forget what's going on in the Sahel states in Africa. And we have to bear this in mind, because this is where I think is a fulcrum of the struggle right now. And the left in the West doesn't seem to be very much on top of what's going on. But just to remind you that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have taken over the resources, and they are resource rich. You know, uranium, they have gold, they have oil, they have lithium, they have everything that the West wants, and they're basically taking over the states. They're nationalizing their resources. They're kicking out the U.S. and French troops. They've kicked out Western corporations. Niger just recently kicked out a Canadian uranium corporation and a French uranium corporation. They're bringing in the Chinese. The Chinese are helping them. The Chinese have a much more partnership and respectful view. And I just want to get your opinion on what you think of this, if we look at it from the global sense of where the struggle is, and why is the left in the West not putting a lot of energy into what's going on in the Sahel states and also other countries in Africa that are leading the way?
Well, I'm not an expert on the situation in Africa. All I can say is that this global struggle that is going on is everywhere, on every continent, and they are interrelated. It's not separate fights in different continents, on different continents. These are one and the same struggle, different fronts of the same struggle, and neglecting any part of it is self-defeating, that's for sure. But why the left in the US is not active about it and assume its true responsibility? I think one thing that I have sensed through this time, and I think it's one of the issues that we are facing even as the US Peace Council with some of our allies, is that the collapse of Soviet Union actually has brought a good part of the left, not just in the US, globally, to kind of give up the whole concept of imperialism altogether and not see the significance of it. And they have gone back into local fights instead of this global fight in the form of national liberation movements, in terms of revolutionary movements within countries towards socialism and everything else. They don't see the whole connecting concept of imperialism that runs through all of these issues, and they want to fight each one of them separately on their own as a separate issue. If you look at the movement inside the U.S., is also the same. Our environmental movement is separate from the labor movement. It's from the separate from the civil rights movement. Is separate from peace movement. Each one engaged in their own area without seeing the linkages. That all of these issues are symptoms of one and the same phenomenon, and that is imperialism. And we have to fight that. So long as they don't understand the need for addressing the issue from an anti-imperialist perspective, they're going to fall prey to all of these traps that imperialist propaganda pushes and even sets various aspects of the movement against each other. We know that. So that's all I can say, that unless we see this whole struggle globally as a one integral struggle, interrelated, that any defeat in Africa would mean defeat for the movement in the US as well. It's not a question of this is a separate fight. Until then, I think we're going to be having this problem continue. This has been one of our struggles in the peace movement and some of our allies in the UNAC and other organizations. That we have to strengthen the anti-imperialist side or wing or contingent of the U.S. movement to be able to overcome these limitations. And as long as we haven't succeeded, we're going to be facing the same issue all the time.
Thank you. So, Raj, you're up next, followed by Janet Coburn.
Okay, thank you. Bahman, thank you for your presentation. I want to say that you've said it is a military defeat, but I think it is not really a military defeat, because military defeat is when the soldiers fight and the other army overwhelms you, defeats you. That's not what happened here, seems to me, from where I'm sitting, from United States. It looked like orders came from above at the top level of the state to not resist, because Syrian army had a tremendous history of fighting, losing a lot of soldiers. Soldiers sacrificed and fought, and yet they did not give in. And there's a whole history, at least 10 years I've been observing. So it wasn't the soldiers. It was at the high level of the state. And here I'm saying, not blaming Assad, okay? Assad lost control of the state, seems like, at the top. And why the top level of Syrian state? And I think it's a very serious setback. It's not just simply a military defeat. I'm not saying it's strategic defeat, but it's a strategic setback, because a secular progressive government has been overthrown and a reactionary religious organization is going to rule. That's turning society backward, where United States and Turkey and other power, Israel, are going to basically carve up or attempt to carve up Syria. This is really a bad news for anti-imperialist struggle. So I want to understand why couldn't a country like China, which is really a wealthy country now, couldn't play a role, like the United States, for example, plays a role in strengthening Taiwan, okay, which is part of China. But why couldn't some of the problems of economics in Syria would have been given sufficient support? I know Russia is difficult for Russia to do it because they're fighting a war of survival for themselves, but China was more capable, and if it's anti-imperialist struggle front, then how could Syria just simply be sacrificed? So that's my question to you.
Great question. First of all, as I mentioned, when I say military defeat, I don't mean actually there was a fight and they lost it. What I mean, it was, as I said, it was a conscious retreat decision, conscious retreat before an attacking military. So in a sense, by the fact that the enemy has captured your capital city, you can call it a defeat, but not in the sense of military confrontation that, okay, there was a fight over every trench and they lost it. No, but it was a conscious retreat. And I would say it wasn't just higher up. When you say higher up, you're correct. Not just by the Syrian government. I think it was a collective decision by Iran, Russia, and agreement of Syria to do that, to minimize the possibility of an all-out war and just add the casualties instead of winning it, because it was clear that given the circumstances, it was not possible to win it militarily. It could drag on for several years of killing of Syrian people and everything else, and ultimately to no avail. As to carving out Syria, let's just look at the map even before this invasion. Syria was carved out, in a sense. They just put an official stamp on it, but they have done it. In many ways, Syria was not, government of Syria was not in control of all of its territory. So it's not that we had a solid, unified Syria and suddenly they came in and carving it out. No, it was the situation. It was partly done in a way. And so that's another one. But as to when it comes to China, we have to understand the situation of China in real terms to be able to find some answer. I'm not gonna be able to explain on the part of China what they prefer. But to me, is one fact is clear. China's growth and development has come at the expense of very deep ties with the economy of the United States. Okay, that acts as a kind of a leash on China, because US have the weapon, economic weapon to punish China, still does, right? And China has to constantly calculate the costs and benefits of taking certain actions internationally. We know that. Of course, both China, Russia did it much faster, cut all the ties with the West. If you remember, before Ukraine, they removed most of their financial resources off the Western system and took it somewhere else. Although not all of it, they could not take. But China has been gradually reducing that tie also. We know that. The question is then, and I go historically, and I would say as China's ties, economic ties to the West is reduced, China has taken bolder and bolder positions. I've seen this pattern going on. So the question, I put myself in the shoes of Chinese and I say, okay, this is my limitations here. This is the cost of taking action. Is it worth doing it at this stage, given the fact the good part of the whole global process toward multipolarism is based on my surpassing the United States economically? Can I sacrifice that part for just winning a battle? All this go into calculation. If you remember, during the Cold War, in the United Nations, while Russia and Soviet Union and US at the Security Council were in a veto battle with each other for decades, China only involved itself with veto power, used its veto power only once or twice throughout the decades. And only when it came to the issue of Taiwan and nothing else. Okay. Now we are dealing with China that gradually, step by step, strengthened its economic power and is having a greater and greater influence on world affairs. At the same time, is becoming bolder and bolder in its action against the US, taking sides, more vocal about South China Sea, taking even an island in the middle of South China Sea as a security buffer for itself. And even if you remember, just lately, they had a huge military maneuver around Taiwan, just to tell them that you're playing with fire here, right? And it's gone as far as having a strategic pacts with Russia right now. This is something unimaginable 10 years ago. These are things that are happening. So if you look at the trend, China is moving in that direction. But it's based on a calculation of costs and benefits and not doing something prematurely that could hinder the whole process just for a victory in a certain battle or a certain confrontation. That is my understanding. I wish to hear from other Congress in terms of how else. What is your explanation of that?
We'll have to go on to the next question, but we'll also have to have you come back because you've just scratched the surface of so many important things, and in particular, the complexity of what's happening in Iran we haven't yet gotten to. But for now, Janet Coburn goes, and then Judith Osterman.
Okay, thank you. There's evidence that this assault on Syria had been planned to take place in next year, 2025. And Turkey, a NATO member and thus allied in that way with the U.S., Israel and the U.S. took advantage of the circumstances at the moment, including the so-called ceasefire in Lebanon. In a recent podcast that I saw, Palestinian Lebanese Syrian journalist Laith Marouf likened what is happening in Syria to when Damascus and Baghdad fell to the Mongol and Crusader hordes 1,000 years ago, a deja vu moment, which was due to the internal squabbles among the Arabs. I'd also like to add how he describes al-Jawlani. He says al-Jawlani became a CIA asset after having been captured in Iraq in the early 2000s and was held and tortured in Abu Ghraib prison. Then somehow he ended up becoming second in command of ISIS when it was founded, and then somehow became the head of al-Qaeda in Syria and involved in the bombings in Lebanon in the 2010s. Malouf says al-Jawlani is a manufactured name as he was born in Saudi Arabia and not the Golan Heights. And now he was rebranded after his recent transformation with a new name, Ahmed Hussein al-Sharaa, a stolen name which belongs to a highly venerated family in Syria that includes a high official in the Syrian government years back who had tried unsuccessfully to mediate peace inside Syria and stepped down but didn't leave the country. I'd like to also mention how another podcast that I saw with Colonel Jacques Baud explains how Syria became so vulnerable since 2011, part of which had to do with how Syria was always divided among minorities, and the powerful there chose the Alawites to rule because they could be controlled by them. So I'd like you to comment on this. And by the way, I'll post those links to those podcasts in the chat.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know anything I should say on top of what the information you gave, and thank you. I agree with what you said. To what degree the question was based on this attack was based on just the ceasefire with Lebanon, with the Hezbollah. I think that is quite too isolated and limited to be a justification for the timing of this attack, because they have been preparing for this for a long time. And the timing, also the effect, I think, as Roger mentioned, the situation in Iran and the internal problems that kept Iran from being more forceful actually in the process since the election has also played a key role. To me, even using that ceasefire as a moment could be very possible, but this is one of the many factors that came together to allow this to happen, not just that one. That's my view, because they had to put a lot of pieces together to get this going, no question about it, and that could be one of them, and I definitely don't doubt that would have an effect.
Thank you.
Okay, Judith Osterman is next, followed by Manning Ness. Judith,
Yes, okay. Can you hear me?
perfectly, thank you.
Okay, good. All right. I did see most of that interview with Laith Marouf, and he blames Russia. He thinks that Russia deliberately abandoned Syria, abandoned the Bashar al-Assad government, and also. Um, Wikipedia says that Golani, that Shara was his original name, Ahmad Shara, and that he was born in Saudi Arabia, but his parents were from the Golan Heights, and it was unclear where he was brought up. And the part about being imprisoned by the Americans for 5 years, they concur with that. But they say that he adopted the name Julani because of the association with the Golan Heights. Okay, so what I want to know is if you can throw any light on this. The situation that the Russians negotiated with the Turks, leaving Idlib as this festering sore. I don't understand why they did this, but apparently Turkey has some hold over them because of access to the Black Sea. And if you could describe what that situation is, I would appreciate that. And also the other thing is that the New York Times just had a story about Iran, and they say that they quote Pezeshkian. We are facing very dire imbalances in gas, electricity, energy, water, money, and environment. All of them are at a level that could turn into a crisis, and the Times says that the industries are closing down, shopping malls are closing down, and they have to ration their electricity so that large areas are left without electricity for long periods of time. Okay, so could you comment on that, please? Thank you.
Sure. About the background of Jolani and all that, probably all of you know more than I do, so I cannot really comment on that. As I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think that Russia or Iran betrayed Syria, and the whole axis of resistance included Syria, Iran, Russia, Hezbollah, and Hamas, and the Palestinian resistance in general. And most of the time, throughout this time of the struggle, any decision they made was a collective agreement. So I'm assuming that even this one was based on a collective agreement with the government of Assad, that it was not worth getting engaged militarily on a ground war inside Syria, and it would be better advisable to have a temporary retreat and regroup and do it in a different way. That is my understanding. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding of the situation. So it wasn't that Russia decided unilaterally to not support. There are news that both Iran and Russia, before things got really out of hand, offered to help militarily, but then the decision was made that it was not possible to do it, logistically not possible, really, to send ground troops to Syria in short term. So that is the story. With regard to the issue of Iran, let me tell you one thing. Pezeshkian is following what Milei is doing in Argentina, talking about all these crises because they want to remove government restrictions from the energy sector and privatize everything. And all the screaming about crisis here, it is not that Iran does not have energy shortage and has blackouts here and there, 2 hours today, 3 hours there. But the way he is putting it, this is a campaign to do a couple of things. Remove the government price restrictions on electricity and on fuel in Iran. They are going toward total privatization and free market economy with regard to energy in Iran. And all the complaints that he is making is targeted to that end. It's not for the purpose of saving the economy. They are neoliberals. And the argument is that the government is not handling it right. Look at what the situation is. And it's partly because of the sanctions and partly because of the government ineptitude. So we should go back and negotiate with regard to the U.S. to remove the sanctions and free the market inside the country with regard to energy so that we can solve the problem of shortages. That's the argument they are advancing right now.
Thank you. That was very enlightening. I was thinking that this weakens Iran in terms of the possible attack by Israel, which may or may not be in the works. They're talking about it. But you could you possibly address the situation in the Bosporus? Do you know the agreements that Russia has with Turkey? Thank you.
I have not followed that particular issue, but I would say part of this conscious retreat was and is, I think, the possibility, kind of in the hope of guaranteeing the security and the continuation of the Russian military base in Tartus. Because if the war went on and Russia was involved in a war inside Syria, probably one of the things it would lose in the battle would be that critical military base on the Mediterranean that really is important for Ukraine war and also other elements. So Russia had this reason also, and I have heard that there's negotiations going on between various parties involved in terms of keeping the military base in Syria. So that was another factor that led to this whole negotiation with the other side, I think.
Okay. Next up is Manny Ness, followed by Richard Wright.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Bahman, for that excellent presentation. This is particularly painful, the fall of Syria, because it is perhaps the last redoubt of Arab socialism historically, with the Baathists and then the United Arab Republic with Egypt. And so we've seen a succession of socialist sectarian states that have basically been destroyed by the West: Iraq, Egypt, Libya, South Yemen, and one can go on. The only country that I could think of is Algeria, but that's probably not a good example. We've seen, I think what the key lever in the whole region is the Zionist entity, to tell you the truth, because they have prevented the advancement of a secular socialist movement throughout the region with respect to Egypt, with respect to Syria. They've pushed the United States to uh, overthrow governments throughout the region. I think the work of Ali Qadri is quite relevant in that context with respect to his book on the unmaking of Arab socialism. Uh, and so I was just wondering if you can see any kind of hope for a revitalization of socialism or even secularism in the Arab world. We're talking about 300 to 400 million people, I think. Thank you.
Well, I really don't know how to answer that question. I'm not sure if that could be considered the total defeat of Arab socialism in any way. But of course, it is a huge step backward, and then definitely. But there are other divisions involved in this whole issue. We should not forget that the same Arab nationalism of the Ba'athist type was in many ways not very happy with getting close to Iran at the same time, with Bashar al-Assad's policy of supporting Iran at the expense of other Arab states. So other complications come into the picture, and I don't know if we can just talk about the Arab socialism in general, instead of just seeing these particular divisions within the Arab nationalism also that are at work. The situation, in my view, is much more complex than that. I don't have an answer to your questions, really.
Okay, Richard Wright, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I had another question prepared, but I'll leave that on the table for a moment. My question is this. That lost, and it seems to me that they were losing in the Syrian situation. That we're losing the fact that it is just one, admittedly a very dramatic one, but it's one in a number of issues that are the European, the NATO stand, if you will, is carrying on in the form of these so-called color revolutions. I think there's one going on in Georgia right now. There's another one going on in Moldavia, I believe. This is another one that's going on. There's a couple more that I can't think of right offhand. My brain cells are dying. Could you maybe comment on what is going on? Are these little droppings being left by the Biden administration, to be precise, and for Trump to take care of, or is there something a little bit more systemic to that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. To be honest, I don't. It's been a long time since I considered there to be a kind of a policy difference, at least foreign policy difference between Republicans and Democrats in the United States. And I see the situation more of a general policy of maintaining U.S. hegemony it threatened U.S. hegemony in the world. And part of that, as we know, for a long time has been organizing these color revolutions. And this became the idea after the collapse of Soviet Union, how they handled it in Eastern Europe. So in a sense, this is the general strategy of the US, systemic, as you said. And the whole idea of actually these smart sanctions that they are imposing on almost everybody, more than what, 40 countries now? More than 30, somewhere between 30 and 40 countries, are aimed at actually triggering these kinds of color revolutions that we are seeing erupting here and there every once in a while. And that is the objective. I think whether Trump or Biden, I think this is the general policy of the United States. And that's one of the methods they are using to block the process of transformation of the world and even regressing the whole process. And they have been successful in some and not successful in some others. But I'm sure Trump, one way or another, will follow the same policy. I have no doubt myself.
Okay, so up next would be Lucy Rios, followed by Paulina. So Lucy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Bahman. I really, really learned a great deal of the presentation. The question I have is, what is to be done now? The Hezbollah, particularly, would it lose its ability to get support from Iran? Or would it be able to continue the fight against Israel?
Well, good question. A few things we can say for sure. If you look at Yemen, for example, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that Iran was responsible for strengthening the Houthis, arming them, giving them missiles, and this was happening right under the nose of U.S. Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf.
Right.
So there are still ways of doing this. I mean, it's not just those ground routes. If you remember Putin in his last speech, he said, Iran originally asked us to transport 4,000 of the Revolutionary Guard troops into Syria for them, and we did it. And when this last attack came, the Iran asked for transportation back of the same 4,000 troops of Revolutionary Guards, and we did it. So the lines are still not closed completely. The question is that ground route through Syria.
Right, yeah.
Okay, secondly, as Hezbollah has shown that it is equipped with a lot of supersonic advanced missiles itself, and they have found the means of producing them, it seems to me, or with the help of Russia or with the help of other sources, I don't know, or Iran, but they have been using it against Israel even after this attack.
Good.
So the whole thing is not shut down, no question about it. I'm sure there are different ways of still continuing, not in the same easy way and not a relatively easier way when Syria was there, but definitely the struggle continues, and I don't think any of the parties of the axis of resistance have given up the fight. Don't forget that there are a couple of things that are working to the advantage of the front. One is the superior military position of Iran in many ways. That proved itself, and they still have that power, military power, and they can use it anytime the push comes to shove. They have decided consciously not to use it, but doesn't mean they will not use it. Secondly, there are still Iranians inside the country that are saying that the version 3 of the attack should come. And the Iranian government says we haven't given up on that yet. So there is still talk about those things. Secondly, Iran has broken down the invincibility of Israeli military. This
Right.
round of attacks has changed what the whole mindset in the Middle East, that people are much more optimistic about being able to defeat the enemy.
Mhm.
Generally, I mean, not in this particular war fight, but generally. And thirdly, let us not forget that the October 7th and the genocide in
Mhm.
Gaza has changed the mind of millions and billions of people
Mhm.
in the world that have joined the other side now. And they are raising their voices. Israel can no longer claim to be the victim in this process. U.S. cannot claim to be the protector of democracy and human rights anymore,
Right.
or impartial arbitrator in the process. So the whole situation has changed. We are dealing with a new situation. And the fact that they attacked is probably coming out of the desperation they had for these changing circumstances, that they had to do something drastic to stop the process. So I am totally optimistic about the situation and thinking dialectically, every force creates its own counterforce at any time. So it goes forward. I am assuming that.
Okay, so next up is Polina Vasiliev, and then I'm going to ask a question that was in the chat from somebody who doesn't have audio access. And after that, we'll hear from our house historian, Mark Albertson.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Bahman, for being here again. I'd like to ask whether you're in touch with any comrades in Venezuela and what their perspective might be on the fall of Syria. A few days after, maybe on the following day after the fall of Damascus, Syrian Venezuelan analyst Bassem Tajeldin was speaking on a Spanish language channel, Data Urgente, and he, like Laith Marouf, blamed Russia for abandoning Assad, and also said that, well, Russia cannot really be trusted to come to the rescue of a popular movement in the global south, say Venezuela, should it come under direct military attack from U.S. imperialism. This may have been an early opinion in the fog of war. I tend to agree with your reading of the situation. But are you in touch with anybody in Venezuela? And what is the perspective from that region of the world or from that particular popular movement?
Unfortunately, I have not been able to communicate with our comrades in Venezuela directly, but I highly doubt it that this would be the position of the Bolivarian movement, talking about betrayal on the part of Russia to me. But you know, a lot of people out of that kind of sense of disaster or catastrophe, I think, have immediately responded emotionally to this. But when facts come out, I think that would negate this kind of claims. And I doubt it, but I'm looking forward to soon talk our comrades, and I will let you know if you want me to.
Please do. Thank you.
Okay, so in the chat, Bahman, there's a question that says, what is the role of the Iranian left and socialists in supporting the resistance in West Asia? What role should they play in regard to the Islamic Republic's strategic revival from Syria? I think it says strategic revival, but maybe it meant the chat comment may have meant strategic retreat. I'm not sure.
Well, the Iranian left, like most of the left, even some of them in the United States, has given up its anti-imperialist orientation and has fallen victim to the same kind of propaganda. I'm not saying the whole Iranian left the same way as we have anti-imperialist left in the United States, the same way we have the anti-imperialist left inside the country. And in fact, yesterday I was in an interview where through a comrade who is having a network called Jadal, which means challenge in Farsi, which has over 600,000 people, viewers generally on various media, and their YouTube website has more than 80,000, close to 80,000 subscribers and viewers. And I was on this Jadal last night, actually, a 2.5 hour interview about the whole situation from the viewpoint of 10-mayor group, which is for the first time openly there's talk of current Tudeh party members who support the Iranian revolution, who have not betrayed the original line of the party. And for 2.5 hours, we discussed the position of the true anti-imperialist left in the process. And even they took it to our comrade, the host, openly discussed the question of attack on to the party publicly, which is being broadcast inside the country. Talked about it and asked questions about it. And we explained what a mistake it was, that the Iranian revolution shot itself in the foot by doing that they have to correct their path, and we have to move forward in this. So I said more or less the same things that I said here, in a much more kind of detailed way for 2.5 hours. And it was so happily welcomed by those left forces that do not have a voice inside the country. It is unbelievable the way they responded. So the situation is in the left now has come to the surface. The battle between the social democrat wing of the left inside the country and the anti-imperialist wing has come to the surface and now has become public for the first time for the Iranian public last night. So I'm very happy about this development, and I think there's a potential for moving forward, and even many revolutionary Islamic forces responding positively to this process. Hope I answered your question.
Yes, I put in the chat the website 10-mayor, the link to that, and I highly recommend it. Next up after Mark will be Laura Wells. So Mark, unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to Iran for just a moment. If you know the way that Iran has been severely impacted here by the Israeli assault on their clients here in Lebanon and Syria. But if conflict is carried on even more so against Iran, I think there's one thing people here seem to forget. Iran has a 1,200-mile coastline along the Persian Gulf, and a lot of this is mountainous, hilly, caves, crevices, outcrops. You know, it wouldn't take much in a conflict with Iran where they could use surface-to-surface missiles and punch some holes into some of the tankers coming and going in the Persian Gulf. What is that going to do to the insurance rates for Lloyd's in London? It's going to raise them, right? Isn't that going to raise the price of the gas at the gas station? How about home heating oil? And one country and one group of people in particular, and we can see this now, they are hardly a naval power, yet they've impacted global trade. I'm talking about the Houthis here, with the way they've missiled ships in the Red Sea. Now, interesting, according to the United States Navy, anywhere from 200 to 300 ships a week go through the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal takes up 20% of the global trade. You know what's happened here? August, September, October, that 200 or 300 ships a week fell to 45 to 75 a week. And these ships have to go all the way around the African Horn now. You know how much that adds to shipping costs? You know how much trade is held up here? You don't think that hasn't had some impact on prices here, inflation-wise? And keep in mind something else. This impacted Egypt, a drop in 2% with their GDP. That's something that's really not really talked about too much here. So with what the Israelis have been able to do here, look at the backlash here by a group of people who are not a naval power, yet have impacted global trade here. Interesting, interesting, interesting.
Absolutely.
That was a good answer. Anything, should I go on to the next person, Bahman, or do you want to say anything more?
No. If you remember Syria, I mean, Saudi Arabia wanted to get involved much earlier, and a missile attack on its refinery, I think, was just a lesson to them to stay out of the situation. So Iran can target a lot of facilities in the region, and as you said, cripple a lot of economic routes, trade routes for the West, oil fields. So it's not easy to attack Iran. I don't think so.
Okay, so next up is Laura Wells, followed by Sharon Rose.
My question, and thank you for your information, but my question has to do with the Kurds and what relationship, if any, that they have. They are like Kurdistan, I understand, is partly in Turkey, northeastern Syria, and Iraq and Iran, and it's an autonomous region in Syria and Iraq, I understand. And I learned about it a few years ago, and I'm not up to date with them, but they were a very, like an experiment in autonomy and democracy, and the women were have been playing a very strong role and things like that. So it's a people powered, my understanding is that it's really about empowering people, which is something that imperialist countries don't necessarily like. And I just wonder, what do you think the Kurds, especially a lot of their geography is in Turkey, what do you think about that related to the current situation?
Well, I recognize the right of the Kurdish people to self-determination as a matter of principle, so I have no challenge with that. But one problem I see with the Kurdish movement in general, in all countries, is when you try to get help from the enemy of the people to advance your own cause. That has been the problem in Iraq. If you remember, with the U.S. invasion, the Kurdish North sided with the United States attack. The side in the portion in Syria just took only the Kurdish issue as the only issue, forgetting that the country is under attack and the West wants to partition it. So to raise that issue out of the context of the threat of imperialism, to me, was not a timely battle for the cause of Kurdish people. And I think the same, the Kurds in Iran, after the Iranian Revolution, picked up arms against the Central Revolutionary Government. which is only says when you only see cause as the Kurdish cause and nothing else. And nothing else. No other conflict, contradiction, fight. And you only look at that and act according to that alone, you can end up in a wrong place. And this is what happened with Kurdish people. I think the Kurdish people, in order to achieve its true self-determination, has to put its struggle within the context of an anti-imperialist struggle. Otherwise, it will always be taken advantage of with the excuse. Remember, U.S. went to Afghanistan to liberate women.
Yes.
Now they went to Iraq to free courts.
Yeah.
So they should not be allowing themselves to be played with, in the context of broader conflicts and wars, and just think narrowly only about one dimension of the issue, because that could lead to. There were some people I remember a long time ago in Palestinian movement who were appealing to the United States to help them against Israel. That is when you narrowly see only one dimension of the issue and do not put it in the context of the broader struggle that's going on. That could be taken advantage of. And I'm sure all three powers will be taking advantage of the course of Syria too.
Thank you.
Okay, Sharon Rose, and after Sharon, Sheila Naka will be up, and then we'll go and get some of those of you who want to make second comments, and we still have some time, so that will work out really well. So Sharon?
Thank you, Bahman. I'm glad to hear that you actually use the word optimism, that you're feeling optimistic in the long term. I have been personally feeling very pessimistic ever since the murder of Gaddafi by the Obama administration. And it's gone, country after country, as was mentioned. And I'm coming back to the title of that we put on your presentation today, that Israel and the U.S. are driving the world toward nuclear war. And in that context, what is your advice to the peace movement in the United States? You mentioned that we are in silos, which of course I agree. People don't talk enough to among ourselves. But what is your advice about where we go from here? I'm a person who works locally around trying to educate people around anti-imperialism. And I would like to be able to see a glimmer of optimism going forward. And so what do you think needs to be done in the United States?
I wish I knew, other than what we have been trying to do, as you said, to try to reorient the peace movement toward an anti-imperialist agenda rather than anti-this, anti-that agenda. And people have to understand the war itself, the nature of the war, the nature of, for example, our anti-nuclear movement is limiting itself to the dangers of explosion of nuclear weapons, not the motivations behind exploding them. What motivation has that nuclear weapon is more important than the system itself technologically. So it's not the question of removing nuclear weapons and assuming imperialism goes away. That's not the case unless you see it in the context of an anti-imperialist movement to stop the motivation for having nuclear weapons. The same with other factors that we are fighting against. How can you have peace if you have imperialism? I mean, eliminate this president or remove that politician or appeal to Congress, but if you don't understand the nature, systemic nature of this thing, you can bark at wrong trees forever and no result. So this has been what we have been trying, and our allies who are on the anti-imperialist wing of the movement to impress upon everybody that we have to go to the, as Mark said, to the root of the issue. And the root, if you get to the root, you will see the branches that come out are connected to that root. And you have, if you deal with that root, you deal with all of the problems you have at the same time. And this is what we have been trying to impress. But unfortunately, you know that we don't have any control over the media to reach the people. Obstacles, censorship, repression. Look at the case with the recent Uhuru movement. So they are silencing, they're trying to silence the whole movement. So we have to find one way of doing it. If you want one solution, I always say it as a motto. Before nationalizing the banks, you should nationalize the media in the country, and that would be the best step toward solving everything. And I think that's the Achilles heel. That's where we cannot reach the people, and that's the divide that they have created between us and the people is the key element in this, and I think we have to be able to narrow it.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the end now, and I really appreciate everybody sticking on for good reason, because Bahman, you really had some very good comments, and the questions have been outstanding. So I think maybe the last two hands I see, and perhaps that will be the last two people to comment or make questions, will be Mark and Mehmet. And then perhaps you could.
Sheila.
Yeah, Sheila's
over
got it.
here. She's had her
Oh,
hand up.
Sheila. I'm sorry, Sheila. My apologies. Sheila is definitely has priority right now. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you. This has been a really excellent program. And I'd also like to thank the people who contributed in the group, especially the person who said he had visited Syria 12 years ago. That's very enlightening, because we very rarely hear actual people instead of the mainstream media talking about what's going on in Syria. And,
Let me just interject really quickly there, Sheila.
Yeah.
The person was Mehmet Bayram, and Mehmet will be speaking at the library, excuse me, at the Marxist Forum on January 12th. So you'll get another chance to hear more.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And
but go on, please.
Yeah, speaking of media, I'm with a group called Pacifica Fight Back, which is struggling to have an anti-racist and anti-imperialist viewpoint in the Pacifica network. And I must say, Democracy Now! Has been especially weak whenever it comes to U.S. foreign policy, especially Syria, the issue of the Uyghurs in China. I guess the State Department really wants to, get control of that mic. So at KPFA, there's a fellow named Ian Masters who's got like 9 hours a week to spread the same kind of pro-State Department propaganda. So that's a huge struggle. But the point I wanted to make is, like Janet, I listen to podcasts, okay? And there's a fellow named Scott Ritter, and I've heard this another place as well. And Ritter was saying that both Iran and Russia had in the recent past with regard to Syria, offered to build up the military in Syria because they saw the weaknesses in the military. Of course, part of the problem was the sanctions. So generals in the Syrian army were being paid, like, I forget, was it $4 or $40 a month, something outrageously low. So both countries had offered to help, but Assad had turned them down. And his explanation for this was that the Gulf states had, who are of course allied with the United States, had been making overtures to Assad to try to bring him into the fold. And so he was sort of vacillating in that direction, hoping that it would lessen sanctions from the United States if he became more cooperative in the same sense that, like, let's say, Saudi Arabia and the other countries are. Therefore, when the poop hit the fan, both Iran and Russia saw that there was no possibility of them intervening and substituting for an army that had essentially already internally dissolved because of weaknesses. So I don't know, what the discussion was within the army, if Assad said, stand down, or if generals had been bought off, or I don't know. But that's what I'm asking you about, this comment that Russia and Iran had made overtures to assist militarily previously, but Assad had resisted.
I have heard this story. This story was spread all over the place after this attack and collapse of the government of Syria. I have high respect for Scott Ritter and his analysis. I do not take that literally, personally, although that this offer was made and Assad refused. First of all, the question, let us look at this government of Syria. You're not dealing with Assad as one person, overall powerful person that decides on everything. You're dealing with military leaders, you're dealing with Ba'ath Party leaders, and you have to figure out where this opposition has come from and which element in the Syrian government. It's not a decision of Assad personally to do this. No government decides on that. It's the same way they all refer to Russia as Putin's Russia and I don't know, Maduro's government and this and that, but these are real governments and they have mechanisms and parliaments and this and that. And I think it's a bit kind of simplifying the situation if you just go by that narrative. May be correct, may not be correct. I don't know. I am waiting for the facts to come out on that one. I read the story. One thing I probably should say about Pacifica and WBAI. Long time ago, I was closely working with Pacifica, with WBAI, with Samori Marksman when he was the program director. He was my dear comrade, and he had great plans for Pacifica and the WBAI. Unfortunately, he didn't live long to carry out what he wanted to do. But my personal view, since his passing, I think WBAI has been on a downhill ever since. I've been one of the fans of Amy Goodman, especially during the Iraq War, which she did a perfect job. But after the defeats that came up, she step by step gave up that radical position and moved more and more to the right, and I gave up listening to her. So that's where things are for me with regard to WBAI and Pacifica.
Thank you. Okay. So Mark and then Bahman, and then we'll, excuse me, and then wrap up. Mark?
Oh yeah, what is another point here? I think that's extremely significant here, and this could result in a trend. I'm talking about the resurgence of levy en masse, the conscription of entire populations and economies for war. This is what you've been seeing in Ukraine. Ukraine is a conventional war. It's not an insurgency / counterinsurgency. The Russians have responded here by trying to take out the Ukrainian infrastructure. Well, that's what you do. You try to take out the economy. You try to take out the infrastructure so the society can't function. Let's go to the Middle East. What has been the Israeli response to October 7? It's a total war policy. This is not a counterinsurgency. This is not what this is. They are taking out the society. They are taking out the culture. They are taking out the road junctions. They're taking out the hospitals. They're taking out the schools. Any form of production. They are waging a total war policy against an opponent that cannot do the same. And so what you're seeing here is kind of a resurrection of what went on here, 1864-65, if you're familiar with what General Sherman did to the Southern economy. That is total war. That's how you win modern war. It's been this way since Lazare Carnot started this in 1793 during the Great French War. And so are you seeing this being resurrected now? Quite possibly here. And that's going to change everything, because total war, unlike an insurgency or counterinsurgency, these are the kind of wars that eat people like peanuts. Casualty rates are high. And so that's what you're seeing here. That's what you're seeing develop here. I hope that's not correct, but I believe that's what you're seeing here. Now that I've ruined your day.
Thank you, Mark. I take it we should go on to Bahman's, Mehmet's question, Bahman.
I'd like to contribute a little bit to the Kurdish question. Kurds do stand smack right in the middle of this, especially from the Turkish perspective. Turkey's involved, of course, to exploit and to extract as much as they can from Syria. There is that Ottomanism and so on and so forth, but that's not the number one thing. Number one thing are the Kurds. Turkey, no matter what, does not want a Kurdish enclave or an organization or a state to appear in their southern border there. And with this, I believe that there are, in the last couple of days, back and forth between Trump administration and the Turkish government. United States has openly said to Turkey that do not move, because Turkey has been amassing huge armies and everything there to go to Rojava and destroy it. Now, the Kurds are actually, I believe, they don't have a vision yet. Kurds fully in Iran, Syria, Iraq, and Turkey, they're divided. But I may say a little bit different from Bahman, that they do not, unfortunately, move just for themselves. Sometimes I wish they would, but they can't, because they are so scattered. They don't have a long-term vision, so they lack that. And that is one of the reasons why I think they are losing in this. And they are seeking protection from imperialists. Some of them, the others are not. But it's a very dismal situation for them and for the Middle East. Yes, I wish that they would get together and try to resolve the issue with the other countries. But how can you resolve it with countries like Turkey? That's something that's nearly impossible. And the only power that is controlling Turkey is the United States at this point. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Mehmet. And Bahman, it's now 12:30, which is our closing time, and what we agreed that we would keep you here until then. But do you have any final statements that you'd like to make, or any summary remarks?
No, not really. It was a great discussion. I enjoyed it and I learned a lot from everybody. And I hope that we will put this negative phase behind, which I'm sure we will, and move forward with the continuous struggle to put an end to imperialism, hegemony, and Zionism in the region. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for inviting me. And
thank you, Bahman, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will now go on to
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.